And when I saw the rushes, I was very unhappy with what I had done in the scene.
Gregory Peck became famous in 1962 for Killing a Mockingbird. At the time, he was seen as the very model of virtue in Hollywood, which was full of temptations. With his calm attitude and warm eyes, Peck seemed like the most honest person in the world. But he was deeply obsessed with and hated the chaos and corruption in the movie business, even though he seemed calm on the outside. Peck often had to deal with events on set that made him very patient. One character showed up with 3 snakes and a suitcase full of alcohol, which made Peck so mad that he said, "I can't work in a circus like this." Someone even brought a real gun to a scene to see how realistic it was, and an extra-large bullet almost killed the assistant director. When Peck got mad, he stormed off the set and yelled, "I signed a contract to make movies, not fight in a war." But who were the stars that made him so mad? And just what did they do to make Gregory Peck, who was normally cool and ordered, lose it? It all started with Hollywood's famous heretic Marlon Brando, his liquor-filled bag, and 3 snakes. Because of him, the movie The Missouri Breaks almost didn't work out. Before PC signed the contract, the directors told him that Brando had changed and was now more professional and calm. But when the group got to Montana, PC found out he had been lied to very badly. Brando arrived with 3 pet snakes, a suitcase full of liquor, and a toy piano that he claimed could help him move his mental energy. He would play a few notes by himself in a corner every morning and tell himself, "Today I'm going to act in the color blue." Peck, a man who put a high value on order and accuracy, was falling apart in the chaos. He was mad and asked, "What the hell is he doing?" "We're not sure," said a team member. "There's a new way to connect socially." There was no better way to describe how different the 2 stars were. Brando would walk onto the set at 11:30 a.m., but Peck would get there early at 7 a.m. and carefully read every page of the book to get ready for the big scene. In this clash of worlds between order and chaos, between discipline and instinct, there was a quiet but intense strain that pushed Gregory Peck, the so-called saint of Hollywood, to the very edge of his calmness. On set, Marlon Brando walked in with a live pigeon in his hands and a wool beanie pulled low over his head. He proudly said in front of the whole crew, "It will act with me today." People should be able to feel the friendship between a man and a free spirit. The whole group was shocked by how cocky he was. Brando didn't say a single line right when the scene started. Instead, he let the bird fly away, his eyes dreamy and far away. He didn't even look at Gregory Peck, who was standing still and holding his useless script. Peck was deeply ashamed. After a few days, Brando started whispering his lines so very hard that the microphone couldn't pick them up. As Gregory Peck watched the chaos get worse, he finally lost it. He turned to director Arthur Penn and said, "I need to see a psychiatrist." His voice was shaking. Arthur Penn quickly stepped back and pulled Brando to the side, barely controlling his anger. "Marin, this is a movie, not an exorcism. Gregory can't keep up with the way you act." He laughed, lit a cigarette, and answered in a low voice that Peck could hear. He then let him try to feel it. That night, the 2 men sat in the hotel bar across from each other. There were only a few tables between them, but it felt like a huge gap. Brando and his friends laughed out loud, and wine spilled over the edge of the glass. Peck, on the other hand, sat still with his eyes fixed on his whiskey. They didn't say a word to each other, but the quiet was worse than any anger. After many years, Brando was asked about Gregory Peck. He just smiled and said, "Greg is like a statue of victory, handsome, cold, and soulless." A reporter asked Peck if he felt bad about what he did after Brando died. The question wasn't answered because the answer might have been in the man Hollywood once called its moral compass's calm, unwavering look. Gregory Peck thought for a moment, and then quickly said, "No, he deserved it." Even though Marlon Brando was no longer alive, the trouble he caused was still going strong. Before he met the next star, Frank Sinatra, PC thought he would never have to deal with such chaos on a movie set again. The careless star drove Gregory Peck crazy. On the set of Captain Newman, Maryland, they almost got into a fight. As an actor, Peck was very disciplined. He would get to the set at 6 o'clock in the morning fully ready. Sinatra was not like that at all. He often showed up after lunch, and the whole crew had to wait for him until almost 11:30 a.m. Even though he sometimes smelled like alcohol, no one, not even director David Miller, or anyone on the sound or lighting teams, dared to say anything bad about him. At that point, no one could hurt Sinatra, a voice that people all over the world know and love, and an Oscar-winning actress. Peck was angry at how unprofessional he was. When Sinatra walked in late and didn't seem interested, PC told the director in a quiet voice, "If he's not sober, I'm quitting this film." Director Miller knew it was very risky to cross Sinatra, so he could only beg Greg, "This is Sinatra. Do not push him. This is not worth your life. Sinatra only did acting as a hobby on the side, to take a break from his busy life as a performer. While Peck was fully immersed in his part in a tense scene, Sinatra purposely shattered the mood by whistling and spitting on the floor. Peck stopped in his tracks and stared right at him. Sinatra just smiled and said, "Sorry, St. Gregory." When a young worker said that Peck looked a lot like a priest, Sinatra laughed out loud, raised his glass and scowled. "A priest? No, it's St. Gregory, who is the dullest saint in Hollywood." During their last scene together, the train blew up. Sinatra showed up 3 hours late and smelled like booze. He barked when the director told him to pay attention. "This is not what I need. It was fun to sing at Caesar's house. I know what feels like." The calm Peck took the script from him, put it down in front of him and said, "Frank, this isn't a nightclub. We are making a movie." Sinatra glared at him and smiled for a moment before snapping back. "Then go make the movie yourself." The set went quiet right away. Two Hollywood stars, who were very professional and very proud of their work, got into one of the tense fights in the history of the business. Gregory Peck's part in Captain Newman, Maryland was over, but he never looked at Frank Sinatra when they were on screen together. Peck wouldn't go to any news conferences where Sinatra was present, even after the movie came out. It's funny, but the tension between them made the movie more exciting. One writer said, "Peck brings control, Sinatra brings chaos, and together they create a stunning dynamic." Later, Peck gave a cold answer when asked about his time shooting Captain Newman, Maryland. Frank was smart and skilled, but he was also unbearable. In his last interview about the subject, a reporter asked PC if he would ever work with Sinatra again. PC gave a small smile and said, "I'd rather act with an empty chair. It won't blow its nose at people though." But Frank Sinatra wasn't the first. Some years later, Gregory Peck would meet another guy. He would later say that meeting this man was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. That person was named Richard Burton. Peck's meeting with Burton turned into an experience he will never forget. They met for the first time at a fancy party in Beverly Hills. Burton walked in with a glass of scotch in his hand. His deep, dramatic voice filled the room like he was reciting Shakespeare instead of talking to people. Someone said that Gregory Peck was the person who invented movies, but I said, "It's Atticus Finch." Burton started laughing out loud and told everyone around him, "Gregory Peck isn't an actor. He's a speech on human rights dressed in a fancy suit." The room laughed out loud at Burton's cocky attitude, but he wasn't done yet. Burton kept making fun of Peck at party after party, calling him St. Gregory or the man who tries to live a good life. Even in interviews, Burton couldn't help but make fun of him and jab at him. Peck talks and acts like he's giving a speech at the UN. In 1965, when Richard Burton was at the top of his game, a new movie idea came up. People who made the show wanted Burton and Peck to work together. Greg Peck got the script first, and that's when history almost happened again. Gregory Peck read a few pages of the script and then threw it on the table saying, "I can work with anyone except an egotistical fool like him." The project was called off within 48 hours. PC's professionalism and perfect image made it impossible for them to work together, which hurt Richard Burton's pride a lot. When Burton later talked to a British reporter, he admitted that he really hated Gregory Peck, not for who he was but for what he stood for. Burton was rude and said that PC's image is the biggest lie Hollywood has ever agreed to believe. Burton didn't try to hide his flaws. He had a lot of drinking, had shady affairs, and often lost his patience. That was the truth of life and art to him. Peck, on the other hand, didn't seem to care about any of it. Peaceful, well-behaved, and almost holy, Burton thought that beauty was an unbearable lie that made fun of his own chaos. "I want to throw up every time I see his face." Burton said, "He's my conscience, the shame I try to hide all the time. He shows that a man can live without going crazy, drinking or sinning, and that drives me crazy. I don't like what he makes me see about myself." When Richard Burton died in 1984, that famous quote was used all over the world as a sign of pride in the press. A reporter asked Gregory Peck the next day if he had anything to say about Burton's death. Following a brief moment of reflection, PC said in a low voice, "A man like Burton doesn't need me to say anything more." If Burton and Frank Sinatra had tried Peck's patience and hurt his pride, the next man would question everything he believed in. The other half of America's split soul is John Wayne. John Wayne and Gregory Peck really didn't like each other. Wayne, who was known for being tough and patriotic, openly backed the Vietnam War while Peck signed anti-war petitions and fought for civil rights. Peck was a moralizing weakling in Wayne's eyes. Wayne looked like he was really angry to Peck. Their anger built up for a long time and finally came out at a party in Hollywood in 1971. In front of a group of producers and actors, Wayne raised his glass and growled, "If America were full of men like Gregory Peck, we'd have lost before the first shot was fired." He was wearing a leather shirt. People laughed, but it didn't last long when Peck, who was sitting at a table far away, stood up calmly and said, "And if America were full of men like you, we'd never know what peace is." From that night on, everyone knew about their fight. Both of them wouldn't show up to any event where the other was. They were asked to be on a panel about heroes in American movies by the American Film Institute, but Peck said no, saying, "I don't want to share fame with him." But bad luck wasn't done with them yet. In 1970, Universal Studios wanted to make a movie called Rooster Cogburn as a follow-up to True Grit. It would star John Wayne and Gregory Peck. Wayne slammed the script on the table when he saw PC's name and yelled, "I won't work with that America hater." The deal was almost done. PC's answer was just as hard and cold. There were two guys, two legends, and two different ideas about what America was really like. They would always be divided by their pride, their beliefs, and the ideas they refused to give up. Gregory Peck looked the director straight in the eye and said, "I'd rather die." He and John Wayne were so angry at each other that they were about to break. The gap between them grew wider over the years. During the time that PC spoke to Congress about peace and civil rights, Wayne became more involved in far-right political organizations. For 20 years, neither of the guys would accept even the smallest act of politeness. Wayne would turn his back on Peck when they saw each other in the halls of the Academy Awards. Peck would stop, straighten his tie and walk by in silence, which was a clear sign of disdain. A reporter asked Peck if he was going to go see Wayne when he was dying of cancer. When PC spoke again, his face was blank, and he said, "I pray for his soul, but I still can't bear to look at his face." They flew their flags at half-mast when John Wayne died in 1979. A huge number of stars sent flowers and messages of support from all over the world. Gregory Peck, on the other hand, did not go to the wake. He instead sent the Wayne family a single letter with only 2 words, "My condolences." After Wayne, though, another man would test Peck's calm. Again, but this time in a very different way. Not because of haughtiness or politics, but because of annoying differences. Orson Welles was his name. He was a crazy, smart man who never stopped talking. Welles was one of the few real minds in Hollywood, but he was also the only person who could make Gregory Peck so calm that he almost lost it. The air on set of Moby Dick was thick from the very first day of filming. Peck showed up on time as usual, ready to play the scary Captain Ahab. But Welles, who was playing Father Mapp, was still nowhere to be found after 2 hours. Then, out of nowhere, he showed up, hanging around in a cloud of cigarette smoke and the smell of wine. When director John Huston told him he was late, Welles just smiled, put his arm around Peck's shoulder, and sneered, "Come on, boys, let's not be so crazy." Peck made a face and gently brushed his arm away. Welles had already gone too far when he didn't care about rules or respect. Things went badly very quickly. Welles started to get in the way of the production, changing lines of speech, suggesting new camera angles, and even going against Huston's direction in front of the crew. Welles spoke like a crazy person during one scene of Ahab praying. Ahab is crazy because of God. Welles didn't read from the script at all during shooting of the shipboard sermon. He spoke in a deep, crazy voice that was hypnotic but hard to understand. Peck stood just outside the frame and watched Welles act like he was crazy. As Huston finally yelled, "Cut," Welles kept going. He looked at Peck straight in the eye and said, "You see that? That's crazy. Gregory, you will never get it. You don't get it." Peck stood still, his jaw locked, and every muscle in his body tensed up with anger. The thought came and went in his mind like lightning. "I should be sorry I didn't punch him." He spoke, but Welles didn't seem to hear him. He leaned his head back and looked up at the sky with a small, crazy grin. He has no idea what crazy means. Then Welles muttered, "What a pitiful little man." Gregory Peck stayed away from him after that day. Welles, on the other hand, was proud of the fact that his acting had saved the whole movie. After many years, PC was asked about Wells in an interview, and his tone became cold. After a pause, he asked, "How should I put it?" He was like a man who'd fallen from the heavens. After many years, Orson Welles would tell the story again to a group of students and laugh like it was nothing. He smiled and said, "Gregory PC is a good man, but he's missing something. I only meant to make him feel a little better." The next time Peck worked with someone, it wasn't quite like Welles. He avoided artistic egos and odd personalities, and instead chose parts that showed morality, discipline, and purpose. He learned the hard way from that experience with Welles that being smart doesn't always mean being honest. But out of all the angry, cocky guys he had met, the one who really made him uncomfortable never cursed or yelled. He didn't need to. Just being there was enough to make Peck feel small. But Kirk Douglas, a man who has an almost psychological need to be better than him. PC and Douglas fought a quiet war for almost 20 years. They were polite at first, but mean behind the scenes. Peck was the face of Hollywood virtue by the late 1940s, when she was already a well-known A-lister. Douglas, who was now popular after winning the championship, hated everything that picture stood for. He sneered a lot. "Gregory doesn't do anything. His morals do it for him." Doug never missed a chance to poke fun at someone in an interview. He smiled and said, "Gregory Peck is as stiff as a board. That's why I'll always be better." That was the difference between them. The quote quickly got around, making things worse between them. Their competition was at its worst in 1963, when Gregory Peck won the Oscar for To Kill a Mockingbird, making Atticus Finch the poster child for moral courage. As the crowd rose to their feet to applaud, Kirk Douglas sat in the back row with a drink in his hand and whispered, "If he were really Atticus Finch, Hollywood wouldn't be drowning in hypocrisy." People close could hear him. Peck heard him. He turned around, shot Douglas a quick, faraway look, and didn't say anything. Once a reporter asked PC about Douglas's comment, and PC just said, "He just loves to put on a show." Douglas then looked for parts that were rough and defiant, like in Paths of Glory and Spartacus. These were the kinds of movies that showed their teeth. In the meantime, Peck stayed the calm center of Hollywood's mind. Two guys from two different worlds. They were both smart, proud, and would always be haunted by the image of themselves in each other. Over the years, Kirk Douglas became consumed by that competition that was never spoken of. It made him tougher, louder, and more easily angry. He was determined to prove something that no one had asked him to. In many ways, he changed Gregory Peck into someone else. Angry, fierce, and by herself. While Peck was Hollywood's idea of a good guy, Douglas was known as the Old Wolf because he was always trying to get attention. In 1960, Colia Pictures asked both men to be in the movie Heroes of Telmark. Director Ray Bolting remembered that Peck turned down the offer almost right away. "I don't want to share the screen with a man who acts only with his chin and his shouting," he said calmly. Douglas blew up when he heard the comment. He laughed and called Peck the hypocrite with a golden crown. He also said that Gregory was just a product of studio polish and that publicists had painted him as a saint. From that point on, there was no way to make peace. Intelligence versus instinct, discipline versus desire, and quiet versus noise were the two extremes of old Hollywood. Their fight went on for decades, through prizes, getting older, and changes in the times. In an interview in the 1980s, Douglas was asked who he thought was the last real star of the Golden Age. He proudly said, "Gregory Peck may be a star, but I'm a man, and I'd rather be real than a statue built on lies." Peck never replied. He barely smiled and didn't say anything. He once told people who asked, "Some people spend their whole lives showing that they're not below anyone and forget that no one is watching." After years, time made them both softer. After Kirk Douglas had a stroke in 2001, a reporter asked him about his long-running fight with Peck. He had tears in his eyes. "In the end, Greg was the kind of person I wanted I could be." Peck only said, "I don't hate him anymore," when he heard about Douglas's illness. "I just wish we had shared our thoughts." Their story turned into more than just a beef between Hollywood stars. Two men fought for meaning in a world that praised illusion. It was a quiet tragedy. Peck thought that control led to truth. Douglas thought the truth needed to be yelled. But in the end, what mattered most was how deeply they were connected, not who won. Two souls burning in the same harsh light. Because Hollywood is not a dream factory at all, even though it shines like gold. The theater is based on tricks. The engine of lies is hidden beneath the sparkle. Faith is put on display. It's practiced to smile. Emotions are like contracts that have due dates. People sell passion.
Sheen
Was changed after the surgery. And love that has been cleaned up so it can be sold. Fame turns into money, bodies, instruments, loneliness and debt that can't be paid back. Every frame is planned, every tear is counted, and every kiss is lit just right. Truth itself has to be cut down to fit the time frame. That same light that used to show the soul now hides it, selling beauty while eating the spirit that lives inside it. Inside the silk curtains are the ghosts of people who thought the spotlight could save them in the past. It never did save anyone though, the light did not save us. It was fire, and the weak burned in silence, while the strong learned to smile through the smoke. Because in Hollywood, everything has to look good, even pain. It's still known as the American dream. You might hear something else if you stand there long enough, past the cheers and flashes. Someone or something faint, raw, and painfully human. The sigh of people who used to believe in the light, but now know it never belonged to them.